Hey guys, it's Brent here. Wanted to chat to you guys about my 79 series Land Cruiser. So sit back and relax and let's have a bit of a chat on how I actually got to the stage of where the car's at the moment. I'll run you through a bit of history of myself and Amy obviously, and a bit of history about how BAW kind of started, and then I think let's all obviously get into seeing the car and we'll have a bit of a walk around. And I'll show you guys exactly what we did, all the products that we use and what it kind of is today. So let's get into it. Okay, so a little bit about myself to start with. I grew up in Mount Isa as a young fella, so I was pretty much out there until maybe 10 or 11 years ago now, and then obviously after that Ames and I moved to Brisbane. A lot of time in outback Queensland, grew up out there. I moved out there when I was 3 years old. Mum and Dad obviously went out, and that was pretty much my life for 20 odd something years. Ames and I met at school out there and obviously got married, etc, etc. We bought a house out there. We moved down to Brisbane pretty much because thing in Mount Isa just wasn't working for us anymore. And so we moved down to Brisbane to obviously start something new for ourselves. I contracted to a aftermarket accessory company for about 7 to 8 years whilst here. Well, maybe a little bit less than that. And then the company got bought out, so the new corporate company that did buy it basically said that they were going to start paying their contractors less, which didn't work for us, having a young family. So we decided to just start doing, well, I decided that I'd just start doing normal auto electrical gear. So, you know, repairs and dual battery systems, just normal type of everyday auto electrical gear out the front of the house. And so we started advertising that. And then it kind of slowly moved into what it is today. But before I go into too much depth, four-wheel drives for me. So I, growing up in Mount Isa, had a lot to do with four-wheel driving and camping and all that type of thing, because 1 minute drive and you're literally out in the middle of nowhere from Mount Isa. So my dad used to, you know, roll through a fair few cars. He had a Pajero at one point. He had a 100 series cruiser. He had an 80 series cruiser. He had a Volkswagen van. I'll actually see if I can get some footage of that for you.
Well, here we are on the road, stuck in the mud. Took the wrong turn. And there's the road ahead. Now we've got to go through the scrub, over that way, somewhere, and find the road.
That he used to try and four-wheel drive. It's actually quite funny. So I grew up doing a lot of those types of trips. You know, the Cape wasn't stupidly far from where we were. Not a small drive, but it was something that we kind of did. The Gulf country for us obviously wasn't far away, so I did a lot of that when I was a kid with the old boy. So it was kind of something that was obviously in our lives a lot when we were kids. Brothers and sisters and I, you had to pretty much put up with that. That was just a way of life. So that was kind of a thing for me, how I got introduced to four-wheel driving and that type of lifestyle. So when I grew up and got a bit older, it was fast cars for me. So I think it was, oh God, this is going back now, 2001, 2002 when I got my license for myself. And back then it was literally fast cars. So, you know, Hot Fours or anything with a petrol V8 in it. So for me, I started out in a Datsun Sunny, 1979, I'm pretty sure it was, Datsun Sunny. Or it might have been 69, I can't remember. Started out in one of those, and then I kind of evolved into anything that Amy owned because I was basically broke. So she had a Daewoo Lanos at one point. She had two actually. I think she had a little budget one that her dad kind of let her learn in, and then she bought her own. And then after that, we moved straight into an SS Commodore, and we had that for a good while until we shifted from Mount Isa. Oh, in the Isa, I actually bought a SR5 petrol Hilux, believe it or not, space cab Hilux. I used to tow my boat with that. don't ask me why I went petrol. I just thought petrol was a great thing back then. So I had one of those for a good while, and I used to flog it around out there. Amy had a pretty big accident with a kangaroo and that thing, and we had to put a god-awful bull bar on the front of it. So it was a chrome, I think it was an ECB bar. It just looked weird, and I just had to run with it. But anyway, that was an insurance thing. Anyway, after that, we obviously moved down here. I think I bought a Triton when I started contracting for myself when we moved down here, so I had one of those. So I've been through a few cars myself, few different four-wheel drives, and just before our son Saf was born, I bought a 2012 RG Colorado. The Colorado was great, loved the Colorado. I had a bit of a soft spot for that, and so that kind of did the job of family vehicle for Ames and I, you know, starting a family back then, and I used that as a way of work as well when I was contracting. So I used that to get around and do my work. So that worked out really well. So the Colorado was really good for us. We enjoyed it. It did everything that we needed it to do. I ended up doing a lot of modifications to that vehicle. So when we kind of got the news that, no, Brent, you're not getting paid as much as what we were expecting, we were actually, you know, in line for a price rise, not a pay decrease. So I just started doing work at home, like I said, and that was when we pretty much started BAW Automotive. So I was just doing all sorts of different repair work and installs, and that was when I started to morph the Colorado a little bit more into the products that we basically use today. So people like Paul from Fat Bars, I put all of Paul's stuff onto the Colorado. I had a snorkel, I had his sliders, anything and everything that he did for that vehicle, we pretty much put on the car. Other people like Custom Offroad bash plates, so Simon, I put his plates on the vehicle, and those guys are still in a good relationship with us to this day. We use a lot of their products, so his bash plates and all Paul's gear, we do a lot of their gear. And that's kind of how I just kept progressing with the Colorado, putting more and more product on there. So like same kind of Rhino rack setups that we do nowadays, I had on that vehicle, and it was maxed out almost with everything I could put on it. But to no avail. It kind of didn't get as much traction as I was hoping as a you know, a company vehicle, if you want to call it that. So it was kind of time to move it on. Through that whole process, I did buy Amy the Colorado 7, which is the wagon version of that vehicle, because we were at that point of 3 kids by then. So it was like, oh, we need more space for children and gear and all that type of thing. So yeah, I still had mine, and we bought Amy a Colorado 7, which was obviously the wagon version, like I said. Turned that into a full mum's taxi mall crawler with some sick 20s, which was fantastic. It actually looked pretty cool. I kind of liked it for that, because we didn't use it for much else but that, because we had my ute, which was set up for off-roading, etc, etc. So we did that, and we did a couple of family trips up the beach, and it was just, the Colorado was getting to that point where she was struggling towing our little camper trailer. We'd get bogged all the time, because basically it was just too heavy, you know, me, Ames, the 3 kids, all the gear that we'd take away, it was just too heavy, and I get bogged all the time. So I had to have, you know, mates pull us out. I think I've got a video of Tommy pulling me out with his cruiser. But anyway, we were at that point where it was like, well, we need to step into something anyway for our family, and BAW basically started to become a little bit more of a Land Cruiser type business. I had one cruiser come in and then another one come in, and then they told their mate about us, and it just kind of kept rolling on from there. So in the early days, it was more repair work and, oh, let's strip all this out because they didn't like how it was and they wanted to start again. So we started doing that, and it just grew from there. So it kind of morphed into something that wasn't on our radar to start with. We really didn't have any idea or vision for what BAW Automotive was going to be. And it was literally just a way of making $1. So that's kind of how we started, and I just kept doing the work, doing the jobs. The neighbours kept hating on us because of obviously how many vehicles we had in the house or on the street or in the yard or whatever. So we eventually had to move into our first shed, which is in the same complex that we're in now, but it was right down the back, and it was very, very small compared to the unit that we're in now. And then, yeah, BAW did some time in that shed, and we kind of grew and developed more relationships with other businesses that were in the scope of ourselves. That's kind of how we got to know the team at JMax, and those guys obviously took us on board to become the Brisbane installer for them. And even in that shed, I actually met Dave and Maria from BAW Aluminium as well. So those guys, you know, way back then when we were in the small shed, we started talking about, you know, trying to team up and basically create vehicles for people like you see behind me with the system on it now. So that was kind of progressing along, and then COVID hit, which was a little bit scary in the early days. And once that hit, everything kind of stopped, and I think the whole world was like, oh, what's going to happen? So that was a little bit of a downer for us, considering, you know, we had all that growth and everything was happening, and we felt like we were making traction. And then that kind of happened, and we were like, oh, what do we do now? So we just pulled back a little bit to make sure that we could survive that. But then all of our awesome customers, like you guys who might be watching right now, pretty much supported us and still wanted to do the builds and make vehicles for themselves so they could, you know, go touring or holidaying locally, which I think was the best thing for Australia, really, because a lot of people are still holidaying and spending their money in our country, which is fantastic. So it's really boosted us in the past few years as well. I no doubt that you might know about even anything in the recreational industry has obviously benefited from this, just from people staying in Australia and holidaying here. So that was really good for us, and yeah, now we've moved into our current facility, which we've been in there for about a year, and here we are today. So enough of me and how we kind of got here. Let's kind of talk about how we got into that thing. All right, so the 70 series, how did we get into the 70 series? There was one big job that came through, and we were still at home. I was still in the carport doing this. Brand new 70 series came through, and they trusted us with this build. It was very, very humbling, and I do appreciate the business from those guys back then. So that kind of came through, and we did it, and it just went bananas for us. Like back then I was just putting things on Facebook. So we threw it up on Facebook, and it got so many views and people loved it and all that. And Amy kind of said, well, why don't we do a 70 series? So we were like, oh, okay, let's think about it. So a bit of time went on, and we'd moved into our shed by then. So things were progressing, and we had the Colorado. I'd done everything to it, and Amy had this wild idea of, well, if we're going to do a Land Cruiser, we need to make it something different. And that's how the whole green Land Cruiser painting, or we were going to wrap it initially because you know, painting's not a cheap exercise. So we talked about that, and we'd talked to a couple of our friends in the industry who did wrapping and who were painters, and then detailers as well, to be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? It's going to spend a lot of time in the sun. So we ended up going the painting route. Anyway, we sold both our cars. So we had the Colorado, two Colorados, and we sold them to make this thing happen. And it came in, it was Sandy Torp before the respray. And so the build began. Okay, so that meant strip the whole vehicle back to zero, goes down to the bump shop, those guys spray it, and then we start obviously our part of doing everything that we do. So, you know, sound deadening and all of those pre-emptive type of things that we could do before the vehicle came back to us then to put it all back together. Did all that. The vehicle after paint then went up to Rob and the guys at JMax to get that system put in. That's how our relationship with JMax started. We first were just a retail customer for the coil conversion. We did that, and then we obviously got talking with the team at JMax and Jason up there, and those guys were like, hey look, we think this could work. So we collaborated, and BAW became part of the JMax family. So that kind of all came through and was awesome for us, because obviously it helped us as a business to keep progressing. And then after that, the car came back. So we had a green cab chassis, coil converted Land Cruiser. There it was in the shed. And we were like, oh, where to from here? So, you know, we progressed with different bar work to start from where it was now. And I had Paul from Fat Bars come in, and we did his stainless steel snorkel on it. And it was a bit of a progressive build over the past few years. So that was 2019, I bought the vehicle. That same year, unfortunately, my dad passed away in a motorbike accident. I think it was, I can't even remember the date now. September 4, I think it was, 2019. Anyway, Dad passed away, so we had a bit of a, I had a bit of a very emotional / turn of the tide, kind of went down into this abyss of nothingness. Thank you, Amy, for being awesome and just being there for me and supporting me. That was amazing. So Dad passed away, and that put a big hold on what we were obviously doing, even with BAW and the vehicle. I had to support Mum, obviously. So that was a massive thing that, you know, kind of really rocked myself when Dad passed away, because he was actually retiring soon and he was gonna jump on board and give us a hand progressing our business. So that all happened. Wasn't a fantastic time, but that's life, unfortunately. And then, you know, as years progressed and all that, we just had a temporary tray on the back of the ute for a long time. And, you know, other things and other products came through, so that's just evolved. And we kind of got to the point where it was progressing so much I had to stop and tear it all out and start again. So recently, which if you go back to another build progress video on the channel, you will see us kind of stripping the vehicle out. Sam and myself did, and we pretty much rewired it to prep for the BOSS aluminium setup on the back, because I kind of had stuff going everywhere. It was every 5 minutes before we needed to do something or go away, it was like, oh quick, we need this on the car, so just throw it in and get it working. So there was a bit of things going everywhere, but now I have refined it and I'm only missing 2 or 3 things that I want to put on this car for now, and then that'll be it, hopefully. So that's kind of how the 70 for ourselves, the BAW 79, came from where it was at the start to what it is now. And I wanted to do a bit of a walk around with you guys and show you what it is at today.